Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today we're going to talk about some of my favorite early summer baits, and these generally work no matter where you're at in the country. We're talking about the period of like May and June. These are just baits I have tied on pretty much any of the lakes that I go to during that time frame. Now, obviously, you've got some fish in different stages, no matter where you're at, and the further south you are, the more those fish are going to be in a full-blown summer phase, but it's still the early part of summer. If you're in Alabama, it's June. Yeah, it may be hot and the fish have been done spawning for a while, but the reality is it's still the first part of summer and you still have a lot of fish that are starting to trickle out of some of those spawning areas and are starting to establish themselves in more of the summer locations, but it's an early summer thing, and these baits are the baits that you're going to want to throw, in my opinion. If you live up where I'm at, up in the North Country, these are going to be some of your absolute go-to baits because you've got a lot of lakes that haven't established their good weed growth yet. You've got a lot of lakes that still are relatively cool in their water temperatures. You know, you may have lakes that are approaching 70 degrees, but we're nowhere near those summer, those August levels of the mid 80-degree temps that we can get to even up here. And the lakes down south, for the most part, aren't quite at those temps either. So let's dive right into these baits. I've got some really good ones for you.
Today's video is brought to you by the Deep Dive app. This has had an amazing new update. As you guys know, I love the water clarity feature. As you can see right here, we're looking at Grand Lake, which just had a whole pile of rain come into it. It went from being really clear to having a lot of dirty water coming in the bottom end of it. Just an amazing feature to be able to determine where the clear water is versus the muddy water. So Deep Dive has just also introduced Stream Flow. Now this is a really cool feature that shows all of the water input coming into certain reservoirs and the amount of water coming in. So they measure it in cubic feet per second. You can see in this case, this is just a small creek, but then you can see the projected as well as the previous flows. If we move up the lake here, get into one of the larger rivers coming in, you can see here that we've got 490 cubic feet per second. And then it shows you that there's not much of a change expected. Now, if there's some rainfall coming, I'm sure those projections will change. If we scoot on over here to take a look at Kentucky Lake and Barkley Lake, much larger river systems, the Tennessee River, you can see what the projected outflow is going to be there, 28,000 cubic feet per second. Go check the Cumberland River here. We got 9.4 thousand cubic feet per second. Just an amazing feature that allows you to see all of the different water flows coming into the different parts of the lake. You can see which ones might be the most affected, which ones won't be affected, see what the projected outflow schedules are. A major feature to help you catch more fish. And that's on top of some of the other new features like the wind effects. Now, the wind effects is really cool because we've had wind effects as part of the app in the past, but all it did is show where the wind was hitting the shoreline the most, as you can see from the dots, the orange and bright red dots, which indicate where the wind is really striking. But now the wind feature also indicates what the wave action is like on the lake itself. So some of the features you're going to get from this is determining where to get from place to place safely by avoiding the heavy, rough water conditions. You'll be able to determine where you may have some of the strongest current flow and some of the places where you can fish to stay protected. Now, along with that, you still have some of my favorite features like the patterns that you've got on the lake that indicate the best baits and lures to fish with. You've also got the water inflow app, which shows you where a bunch of the rain input comes in. That can be an amazing pattern to fish throughout the year. Just a great feature to have. So many positive features anytime you're fishing or using the Deep Dive app. Just points you in the right direction to catch more fish. Whether you're a tournament angler or a local fun fisherman that's just out to catch a few fish, the Deep Dive app will help you catch more fish next time you're out on the water.
So the first one that I got to talk about is a frog. To me, your post-spawn early summer period is one of the best times to be throwing a frog. This is the Berkeley Swamp Lord, just a great hollow belly version. And for me, it doesn't really matter if we're talking about a straight nose, a walking style bait, or if you're talking about the popper style that has a little bit of a cup here. That comes down to the cover that you're fishing. If it's too thick to get the popper to work well, that's when you go with the straight one. Or if you're fishing, cover that is a little bit thicker where the popper just gets caught on it. So maybe you're throwing around a lot of bushes or laydowns. It just doesn't come through as well as the hollow belly with the straight nose. But regardless, the popping version or the walking version are killers during the post spawn period. You still have a lot of fish that are up shallow. You've got a lot of cover that's starting to mat up shallow. You've got a lot of fish that are still guarding fry, and you've got a lot of fish that are still chewing on bluegill beds. And from that standpoint, your frog is going to be one of the best baits to utilize in those circumstances. Doesn't have to be in thick pad cover or weed cover that a lot of people think frogs excel in. Frogs are extremely good open water baits too if you're fishing around cover and you just want to make sure it comes through it clean. You can't take a treble hooked topwater bait and fish it up and over logs or skip it under docks like you can a hollow belly frog. So something like the Swamp Lord is a bait that I have tied on really from here through the summer months, but it just seems like June, in my opinion, is the best month for a frog. If I had to pick one month to throw it, June would be it. So that's one. Along those same lines, topwaters excel during the early part of summer too. I really like bluegill colored poppers. And the reason for that, again, is I'm going to be fishing these up shallow around targets that a lot of times have your bluegill beds, and the bluegill beds are starting to ramp up in June into the summer. And a good bluegill colored topwater like this Bullet Pop is just one that I love. I also like to throw ones with some form of feathered treble on the back. I personally think that does a really good job at looking like the tail of a bluegill. And that's how I go. This is one I just grabbed out of the package. I'll actually trim that much shorter, but ultimately a popper is a great bait to throw. It's really similar to a frog. The difference between these is if I can't fish the popper cleanly through the cover, that's generally when I go with a frog. I can't necessarily skip a popper up under docks as good as I can a frog and get it out clean. Meaning if I hit a dock post, a lot of times you'll get stuck on it, whereas a frog will come through clean. But the two baits are very, very similar for me. If I'm fishing a lot of heavy weed, but there's good holes to fish, I'll still throw a popper in that situation. The Bullet Pop's great for that. And I'll throw it into those holes knowing that I may only pop it 3-4 times, and then I'm pulling it back to the boat with a wad of weeds on it. But there's a lot of times where I can get a popper to work really well still in pretty thick grass growth where I don't necessarily have to throw a popping frog. Needless to say, these are kind of a 1-2 punch for me. Bullet Pop, more open water, a hollow belly Swamp Lord if I'm fishing, thicker cover. And I'll sometimes have a walking frog as well as a popping Swamp Lord rigged up just for those instances. So those are two baits. Now, one other thing I want to point out, the fish are still generally pretty lethargic. You've got fish that are recovering from the spawning process. And I find anytime you're talking about fish that are just turned off, not necessarily really aggressive, that's where your wacky rigs are going to come into play again. So something like the Berkeley Maxcent the General, that's one of my favorites. I really like the one that's got the black tip on a green pumpkin. I think that does a good job at mimicking your small bass as well as bluegill that are in those areas. I like to fish it personally on a weedless hook like our Core Tackle weedless wacky. This is just something that allows you to present your wacky rig into those areas where a lot of your fish are going to be. Again, docks, shade lines, bushes. You still got a lot of fish that are up shallow for the reasons that I mentioned previously. And you have a lot of fish that are starting to cruise the bank looking for bluegill beds that are just starting to form little wolf packs. And your wacky rigs are a great, great way to do that. In fact, it's one of the best baits in my opinion, if not the best, at generating lethargic fish to bite that are just not aggressively looking to feed. They will swim over and eat that and not give a lot of other baits a look. So you have to have a wacky rig rigged up in my opinion. Then you're starting to talk about fishing some of those fish that are moving out from the spawning grounds, but have not fully moved out to say the ledges that are on main lakes, your main lake drop-offs, your main lake weed lines. Especially, you just have fish that are kind of caught in that middle zone. A lot of times you're talking about 4 to 8 foot of water because that's where you have some of your good grass starting to develop. That's where you have some of your shell beds on lakes that don't have grass, but the fish aren't out fully on the ledges yet. You just have fish that are transitioning, so they're a little deeper than where they spawn, but they're not out in those summer depths where they need to find a little bit cooler water. When you're still talking about lakes that are in the upper 60s, low 70s, even mid 70s, those fish can be anywhere. And a good portion of those fish are still going to be in that transition route. So that 4 to 8 foot range is going to be something to be looking at. And that's where I really like to throw your any of your flipping style baits. This is a Berkeley Pit Boss, but if you like the beaver style baits, and you fish it in a lot of different ways. I personally really like to fish it on the Ozark rig. The reason for that is when I cast the Ozark rig out, I'll get a nice little shimmy on the fall, and we're not talking about really deep water. So it's a slow, tantalizing fall that generates a lot of strikes. I prefer it versus, say, fishing a Texas rig in that manner. But if you want to fish something that's a little bit more bottom-like, that's where you could pick up more of your wobblehead style baits and drag it. It just kind of depends on the cover you're fishing. So for me, I'm gonna have, probably be fishing stumps, maybe some laydowns, maybe some grass edges, little rock piles. I really like to find shell or hard spots. And from that standpoint, if there is cover around, I still like to have more of a weedless presentation that's not glued to the bottom like I'd get with the wobblehead. I like to have something that will have a nice slow fall. The same thing can be said for fishing, just like a power worm. So I'm going to be fishing some form of plastic bait on those shallow areas. Personally, like I said, I really like the Ozark rig for doing that. And then last but not least, those same areas, those same bigger flats on a lot of lakes where you have fish that are moving out to the deeper water from their spawning grounds. I still think this is one of the best times to be throwing a swim jig. We love the swim jig in the pre-spawn period when the fish are really getting up into some of those shallow bays. A lot of those fish are still in the shallow bays or out right on that drop off from that shallow bay. I'm talking, when I say drop off, I'm saying like that stretch where it drops from like 3 foot to 4 foot or 5 foot. Like, it's not a drop off, it's just a little bit deeper water. Or a lot of those shallow bays have maybe a ditch or a channel running through it where the channel might be 4 or 6 foot of water, but the edges generally still have some pond grass that are growing there. A swim jig is just a great bait for covering water on those bigger spawning flats where you're trying to come in contact with a bunch of fish on some sort of edge, and there's generally some weed growth that's developing. Sometimes you still have some of those pad fields. You might start having a random pad come up that's actually hitting the surface. Swim jig is absolutely perfect for coming through those areas and generating strikes, but doing it weedless so that you can fish those areas efficiently and effectively. I love, love, love the swim jig in the early pre-spawn period. Now, once you start talking about the water getting up a little bit warmer and you start getting weed growth that's grown up to more of your summer levels where they're hit the full distance, doesn't necessarily mean it comes to the surface, but you have the weed growth kind of at its full growth. That's when we're going to start looking more to move offshore, more to get on the outside weed lines, to get more, into your deeper water areas, because that's where you have the ability to find a lot of your schools of fish. But right now you have a lot of fish that are spread out, that are still transitioning from spawn out to summer levels, and you're looking still in those mid-range areas, in my opinion. And these are the baits that I love to utilize, whether I'm north or south. So check them out. I'll put links for each of these in the video description if you want to check them out, support the channel while you're doing that. And otherwise, stay tuned. Let me know if you've got any video suggestions, and we'll have a new video coming out for you tomorrow.